Hello and welcome to Holy Trinity's YouTube channel and a very special moment as we unveil our new assistant priest, Father Fergus Butler-Gallie. Welcome, Father.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be with you.
It's great to have you in our virtual room. Only yesterday you were gazing across the Mersey from your flat in Liverpool, home of the Beatles, and now you're eyeing up the King's Road, Chelsea's iconic street. But where did life begin for you?
Well, I was born in Kent, and I suppose when people ask me where is home, where do I come from, I still say Kent. But actually, I sort of moved around an awful lot since then. I've really never been in the same place for longer than sort of 5 years or so. So life began there, and I still feel quite a sort of link to that neck of the woods, and it's nice to be closer physically to it here than I have been, well, for many, many years, actually. This is the closest I've been to where I was born, probably since I was a child, actually. So it's quite a joy to be back in a sort of area that's in the geographical sort of blast zone of where I was from.
And Kent, I think, is where your parents live?
Correct. So they're still there. I'm one of 5 siblings, all younger than me, so they're all at various points. I have a sister who lives in Germany, one in London, and a brother and a sister both at university still. So yes, they're sort of from quite a big family, very, very sort of strong-willed and independent. We were all told as children we could do whatever we wanted, and I don't think my parents quite realised that for me that would manifest itself in the priesthood, but there we are.
Hopefully we'll see members of your family over the next few months.
Absolutely, certainly.
Great to see them in Sloane Square. Now, university days meant that you were studying history and Czech-Slovak. How did that come about?
Well, so that came about interestingly through a sort of, in some ways, a twist of fate related to my birth. Really. I was born with a congenital heart condition, so I know this area very well, having been spent, most of my early years at the Brompton, just down the road. But the result of this was when everyone else at school was made to do the cadet force, the school decided I wasn't, they didn't want to risk the insurance of having to have someone who could keel over at any moment doing it. So they sat me in a room and I was taught Russian instead. That was my activity whilst everyone else was playing with guns and rolling around in the mud and doing fun things. I sat with a very formidable lady 4 hours every Wednesday, and I was taught Russian. And that evolved. I sort of thoroughly enjoyed that, and so Slavonic languages became something that I was interested in, and I thought, well, why not? I fancy doing something beyond just history. I've always really been a historian at heart. I'm not a proper linguist, certainly, but I applied for Czech and Slovak, thinking I'd never been to Prague at that point. I'd never had any knowledge, but there's enough sort of concomitance in vocabulary and things and structure, if not alphabet, between Russian and Czech. I thought, well, it's enough to get me going, and so I did. I studied history in Czech-Slovak and lived out in Prague and in Brno and a little town called Poděbrady, across the Czech Republic, really, for my year abroad, and indeed over that 5-year period when I was in and around Oxford, there wasn't a single year I wasn't in the Czech Republic in some way, shape or form, or in Slovakia. So and still a place I hold very dear. I thoroughly enjoy my time there.
A beautiful part of the world.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but what might you teach us to say in Czech-Slovak?
Well, you'd be surprised how much people know, largely because Borat, Sacha Baron Cohen's character, speaks largely his made-up sort of Kazakhstani, is actually mostly Czech. So jak se máš is how are you? Děkuji is thank you. Dobrý den is hello, and I would say, jmenuji se Fergus, so I'm called Fergus. So you could say Dobrý den. I suppose we could say the start of the Lord's Prayer. Otče náš, jen si na nebesích, posvěť své jméno tvé, přijď království tvé, buď vůle tvá, etc., etc. So maybe I will make it my mission to teach the congregation at Holy Trinity the Lord's Prayer in Czech over the course of.
Well, please do. Every year on the Feast of Pentecost, in in the Mass we have the Lord's Prayer in different languages, and that would be
Oh, there we
quite an
go.
addition
Well, there's
to what we've been used to over the years.
fabulous. Well, I'll add Czech. I'll add some Czech to that when it comes to a glorious cacophony.
Now, as well as learning Czech Slovak, you've also been writing books, and I have them here. A field guide to the English clergy.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps fair to call it a compendium of the most eccentric clergymen ordained in the Church of England down the years.
That's a fair summary.
And here, Priests de la Résistance, a really fascinating insight into the clergy who stood up against fascism. Mm. Before we go into the details of the books, how did book writing come about?
Well, I suppose I'd always written in some way, shape or form, having been used to it through university and sort of beyond. And I actually joined Twitter as a joke, but it was the first book came about through a specific thing on Twitter where I put something out about eccentric clergy. And I was approached by a publisher saying, do you think there's a book in it? And I said, well, I think there's probably several books in the clergy of the Church of England, frankly. So that was how that specifically came about. And then it just, it was moderately well just received. And so then it became a bit of a thing and opened more doors and more opportunities. So really it was through just a sort of an idle sort of spout from my brain, really, that became a tweet, became a book. But writing has certainly been something I've always done and been sort of comfortable with.
Yeah, and what have you sort of picked up from these two books? What has stood out for you by researching and writing these great stories?
Well, I suppose the full, the glorious diversity of those called to the priesthood. I suppose well, and also the strange, because all of them, even in the second book where it's people who resisted, they were generally people who might be considered part of the sort of awkward squad. They weren't necessarily those whom the church considered to be their brightest and best, not always anyway. So I think there's something in that about the awkward and the strange being the places where we can find the beautiful and the true, I suppose. That often the vessels by which God's grace is made known aren't necessarily the ones we expect. And so, yeah, there's something in that, and yeah, in a world that seems increasingly samey and grey, it's about adding a dash of colour, I suppose.
So, any one particular character that you're aiming to channel?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't dream of being able to channel such marvelous figures. But I must say, I have a great love for Canon Keir, after whom many people will not know this, but the Keir Royal is in fact named after a clergyman.
Yes, I had no idea until I read your book.
Nor had I until I began research. I actually went to Dijon. I went to the town hall where he had his office. He was the self-appointed mayor of Dijon during the war. He just marched in and made life a misery for the Nazis, to the extent that they tried to shoot him and he managed to escape. He had all sort of swashbuckling, but his great love was Bloc de Cassis, where he would have cassis with Aligoté white wine, and he would drink this as though it was going out of fashion. And to the extent that they just sort of cut out the middleman and named it after him. So he is, I think, he is a marvelous figure, full of courage and joie de vivre, and also with a very refined palate as well.
I'm sure you'll find no shortage of Keir Royal in Sloane Square, so you can look forward to many drinks. But what about your own vocation to the priesthood, Fergus? How did that come about? How did you discern it, and what were the steps that brought you to ordination?
I suppose it's been a sort of very typical, but also I suppose an atypical process, in that I wasn't really from a particularly religious background. My family had us baptized as children, but certainly we weren't churchgoers. They might go at Christmas, but it wasn't really anything that played a major part of my life. as a child. But it was something that I suppose it was through history, that through history you keep on coming across this monolith called the church. And so I suppose I made some decision, probably in my early teens, well, intellectually I've got to engage with this. And church buildings and things and the history behind them had always been of interest, but I hadn't really, I couldn't truly say that I had a faith, more an interest in the kind of ephemera of the church. But so I suppose I went along, and again, there was no burning bush moment, but there was just a slow realization that I believed this to be true. Now, as you sort of implied from my books, part of something that has been a feature in all my life is not taking things seriously, or too seriously, I suppose. And so for me, vocation has always been a slow realization of what needs to be taken seriously and what doesn't. So fundamentally, I suppose, the question came in, well, if you're a Christian, what's the logical point you take it to? And for me, ministry became something slowly that I discerned over the course of my time at university mostly. I was very lucky with some fantastic clergy who were around me, who nurtured that vocation in a way that was right for me. And so, yes, this was something I discerned, over a fair few years, and thinking about what was it that I was called to do in my broader vocation as a Christian, and that led me to the priesthood. It's not very sort of theologically sound, but that I remember one priest told me that God ordains those that he cannot save by other means, and I always rather thought that was true. That for me it was always the sort of it isn't a vocation for everyone, but it felt, I suppose, for me that was where my broader Christian vocation had to go. It was the direction I had to go with. So yes, I was, as I said, I was lucky, and then trained at Westcott House in Cambridge, where I was very lucky with the people who are around me. I had fantastic friends still, a cell group and things from there who are fantastic support, and also the teaching. I was very lucky there, and I got to do placements out in various churches and across the world. I spent some time in South Africa, which was very important for me in terms of nurturing my vocation more generally. But I would say, I suppose, it's a process that's always in motion. One doesn't simply stop having a vocation or stop having a discernment process, really. It's ongoing, and my time in Liverpool was absolutely crucial for that, and I'm sure my time in Sloane Square will be another layer to that, constantly evolving vocational picture.
So you were ordained 2 years ago, yes, in
Correct.
2018 in Liverpool Cathedral, that extraordinary building.
Scott, I mean, you don't really know what a big space is until you've been in there. It's quite something.
And what do you feel you've learned over the last couple of years in Liverpool? What's ministry in that glorious city taught you?
Well, I mean, it is just a marvellous place in terms of its people, its culture, it's everything that it has to offer, and quite strong in its identity as well. I suppose what was really key for me was learning. We talk about mission and ministry being contextual, but for there it really was a place where you had to sort of throw yourself in, and it couldn't be the imposition of sort of generic, bland platitudes. You really had to express the faith in terms that were relevant there, and then you had to I suppose express eternal truths. People got that sort of sense of the eternal, I suppose. That was something that I felt very strongly there, that it is a city still of faith in its own way. It does, things like passion, it does things like sacrifice, it does, those are all things that come naturally to the sort of cultural sphere there. And so speaking into that, the eternal truths of the love of God was pretty key. But so in that sense, what I ended up focusing on mostly was the pastoral. For me, it was a city where people expect pastoral visiting, they expect pastoral contact, so that became a real bedrock. I mean, it's often what a curate does traditionally as well. So that round of things really showed me how important all of that can be to nurturing a healthy church community. We're very lucky large numbers of the occasional officers as well. We did, I think next year they will do something like 60 weddings at Liverpool Parish Church. Very large number of baptisms, fewer funerals as well, because we were a young parish residentially, but we did do a number of funerals of church members who had died. And just that the rigor with which the pastoral offices were done, and the importance which people held them in, was fascinating to see again how that translated into church growth. But also it's a interesting diocese, and it's largely an evangelical diocese, with pockets of sort of real high church worship, and Liverpool Parish Church was always one of those. So it was made me sort of comfortable within the tradition. The rhythm of things that sustained me was something that I thought about there a lot as well. So yes, it was a hugely beneficial period. And I'm looking forward to taking some of those lessons that I hope I've learned.
And I think you reached out to the hungry and the homeless, and you were involved in that work. Absolutely.
There was an awful lot of what you might want, for a better word, called sort of social justice work going on. I was directly personally involved in food bank and refugee drop-in, in taking things to the housebound, things like that. So there was an awful lot of that went on. Liverpool is a place with a very proud history and a fantastic and lively future, but there are pockets of quite severe deprivation and quite serious need across the city, but in our parish specifically, which is right in the city centre. So yes, there was an awful lot of that involved as well. It's something, we have the immediate city centre patch, so I work with the homeless and the fantastic Whitechapel Centre up there. Getting to know the homeless community was really at the centre of what I was doing. So again, it's that pastoral and creating relationship. I suppose as someone who is, some high churchman, the incarnation is at the centre, I suppose, of how we view the world transformed. And at the centre of the incarnation is relationship. And so what came crucial for me was creating relationship wherever I went, and whether that was with the Lord Lieutenant on our kind of civic side of things, or whether it was with some of the guys who used to sleep in the church gardens. Then relationship was at the absolute core of everything that I felt called to do there. And again, I hope will be true here as well.
Now, of course, we've been hearing a lot about Liverpool in recent days as the pandemic has swept across the nation, and government has placed Liverpool in one tier or the other. How's your experience of COVID-19 been?
Well, it's obviously been a very strange time for all of us. For me personally, as far as I know, I haven't had it. I haven't had an antibodies test. I've had the other test, and I know I haven't got it, but I don't think I had it. So I can't say I had a physical side of it. But for me, again, having taken over a lot of the pastoral care at Liverpool Parish Church, for me, it was sort of kicking into making sure we had robust structures around that, so that people who were lonely and were isolated felt they had a contact, and really seeing how important the church was in that was eye-opening. I'll be honest, the first few months were an awful lot of work. I spent a lot of time, with ringing around people, with working out Zoom. I suppose all of us are learning curve on the technology has just gone through the roof. I wouldn't have been able to. I didn't know what Zoom was at the start of all, I'm sure, like many people. And so just having to learn that has been, it's been a busy year. And I suppose for me, again, it's taught me where the rhythms are. I have found the rhythm of the office from the prayer book crucial in keeping me sane, actually, the kind of the sense of repetition, but repetition within the kind of sphere of the glory of God, rather than the negative repetition we sometimes got used to in lockdown, where every day seemed the same. It was a great reminder of repetition as healthy rather than repetition as destructive. And actually, for me, that was incredibly sanity preserving, I would say, during the midst of it all. So yeah, a funny year, as I know it's been for everyone, and I can't claim I've had things particularly badly, but it's been busy, certainly. I've seen what the church can do in terms of offering hope, and I know that down here in Sloane Square you've done the same, and we will continue as we emerge into whatever brave new world we're faced with post or just pre-vaccine. It's in many ways it's now an opportunity to look at what things will be like on the other side.
Now, I think it would be impertinent to disclose a clergyman's age, but I think I can say safely that you're not yet 30. How do
No.
you see the challenges facing the Church of England in the course of, say, the next 20 to 30 years, when you will be
Gosh,
a priest?
well, yes. I mean, I think there are obviously challenges. No one can dispute um, issues around numbers, around sort of visions for the church. I would say, to my mind, we have to return to a default position of um, being aware of local particularity. I think parish will have to be something that is fought for and preserved over the next 20 to 30 years. And loving the people in that place. And then on a sort of parallel, if that's the micro level, on the macro level, loving the nation in all its sort of forms and its diversity. And I think that the challenge, I think if we do that, then we mirror the love of Christ. And that is something that is always attractive and will always be something that people will be drawn to. But we have to be quite clear and confident, I think, in doing that. And I suppose we can't be excessively apologetic for our faith. I don't think we can be. We have to believe what we're preaching, I suppose. And I guess the challenge going forward will be is how do we do that in a way that is convincing, and in a way, as I say, that speaks of the love of God. That is the challenge going forward, and being aware of what treasures we have and what we have to offer people. I think people are increasingly, my generation is increasingly atomized. We have got used to minimal relational interaction. You know, even when you go to the supermarket, it's now done by a machine. And I think what the church can offer is that deeply incarnational sense of relationship. You know, there are very few places during the course of a week where you will see the sort of relational interaction going on that you see in a church, and between often people from very different, you know, social or economic or racial backgrounds. And as we become increasingly atomized and increasingly comfortable within the four walls of our own space, I think having something that grounds us in transformative relationship will be what we have to sell. And again, that's transformative for people on an individual level, that relationship they can have with Jesus Christ, and it's also transformative on a national level. I think specifically what the Church of England needs to fight for and defend quite crucially is that sense of that. I was ordained to a church, not a conventicle, and actually we really have to my mind, the challenge will be not retreating into comfortable, isolated, small purity, but actually evangelizing and admitting that we exist for something bigger and greater and wider than that, and doing that both on the local and the national level.
Now, you mentioned Twitter earlier in our conversation, and you've proved very successful in inhabiting that space. How do you sort of see social media today, its sort of strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I suppose it sort of reflects on what I was just saying, that I think a problem with social media is it's done at a distance. And the reason why people can be so deeply unpleasant on there is because they feel there's a distance between, these are things they'd never dream of saying in person. And so there's an automatic distance, and yet there's also a closeness. You know, you can have contact with, you know, a celebrity or someone someone on the other side of the world that you could never make. So there's the paradox there of Twitter that you are closer to people and following the details of people's lives in a way that we have never known before, in terms of the conflation with the private and the public, and yet we are also at a distance that we can lob words and things. So I particularly think a Christian use of Twitter, I'm quite keen to subvert it. I think you know, I take St. Paul's sort of instructions about how we deal with the world as being, you know, at the moment the world, for better or for worse, manifests itself through social media, and those are, for many people, those are their worlds. And I think the Christian job is to subvert it through good humor, through love when it is called for, but again, pointing people to the fact that it is not the be all and end all. I think we are in risk of having people who live their whole lives on Instagram or Twitter. And I suppose the job is to just point away from it sometimes, and to introduce sometimes an element of the absurd, I think is helpful, because the worst thing that we can do is take these spheres too seriously, and again, therefore lose what I talked about earlier, which is that primacy of relationships, that primacy of the truly interpersonal. And whilst relationships can be built up there, I do maintain that the ultimate relationship, namely between us and God, is manifested in Christ, who is born and has friends, and who is physical. He's innately physical. He touches and he lives and he dies. And if that is the ultimate standard for relationship, we have to, I suppose, point to that as opposed to anything that would seek to replace it.
Well, perhaps you can help us at Holy Trinity to love the social media a bit more. Some of us struggle a bit to sort of connect to it. It'd be great to have someone on board who can help us to befriend this new development.
My pleasure.
Well, look, we mustn't detain you too long because you've got lots of boxes to unpack.
Yes, I have.
But just tell me finally, what are you looking forward to in Sloane Square?
Oh, I'm looking forward to knowing and loving the people, primarily to meeting and engaging with people there, being part of the ministry in what is clearly a thriving and happy church, which understands and takes seriously the beauty of holiness, and has a sort of prophetic witness in that regard to the Church of England, to the nation, and to this particular sphere of London. I'm looking forward to being part of that enormously. And as I say, getting to know the great adornments of the church. I'm always minded of when St. Lawrence was told by the emperor to bring the treasures of the church before him, he brought its people. And so I'm looking forward really to getting to know those treasures that are there, I know, from the encounters I've already had at the very heart of Holy Trinity.
You're being licensed by the Bishop of Kensington on Tuesday.
Correct.
And you'll be joining us at the Sung Eucharist as we make a return to public worship on Sunday, the 6th of December, and you'll be preaching.
I will be preaching, so do come along. I'm looking forward to it enormously.
Well, we're really excited to meet you. All the very best as you settle into your home. Father Fergus, Butler-Gallie, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.